Then also proceed to Madam Precious Sibia, who is also a recently appointed part-time regulator member of the National Energy Regulator, as well as a member of the Electricity Subcommittee. Madam Sibia.
Thank you, Kwabe. Good morning, everyone. My name is Precious Sibia, as the chairperson has said. Good morning and welcome to everyone in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. We'll then proceed. Just to note that this hearing was duly advertised in the following newspapers, the print media nationally, being the Business Day on the 11th and the 12th of September 2022, the BL on the 12th of September 2022, and the National Independent newspapers on the 12th of September 2022. It was also posted on our website, and it is held in accordance with the Energy Regulator Act, in which affected parties are given an opportunity to submit their views and present relevant facts and evidence to the Energy Regulator. This hearing is governed by the NERSA rules on public hearings, which can be summarized as follows. 1, all parties will be required to make their presentations under oath. 2, the presenters have been allocated 10 minutes each to make their presentations. 3, only members of the panel may ask questions to the presenters. However, members of the public may forward their questions to Mr. Eliezer Dlamini at eliezer.dlamini@nersa.org.za, and Mr. Dlamini is going to put the email address on the meeting chat to assist with that, and is also informing me that there are 20 minutes for today's presenters and 30 for Eskom. Once Mr. Dlamini has received the questions from the members of the public, he will then forward them to the panel to then decide on how to deal with those questions, noting that some of them might be duplications or maybe differently posed questions to those that the members of the panel would have made already or intending to make. Fourth one, should presenters wish to present information they consider confidential, the panel will make a ruling on whether to close the hearing or to have the information submitted in writing. The recording of this hearing will be done through our recording system and will also be streamed live via the audio streaming on NERSA Twitter page, which is at NERSA_ZA. This will be the official record of this meeting. The house rules for this meeting are: 1, please switch your cell phones to silent mode. 2, please ensure that your mic and video are switched off at all times, unless you are making a presentation.
I have a sleeping bag, you can use it.
Sorry,
if you can take it, but
panel mode, and you are just doing exactly the thing that I'm saying should not be done. Please, let's cooperate. I'm saying, please ensure that your mic and video are switched off at all times, unless you are making a presentation. And for the sake of data flow challenges, a presenter may switch off the camera once
but
the
like
oath
said,
has been taken.
I have a sleeping bag. Can use it. Yeah.
Ntabeleng, I think I would end up having to eject you from the meeting if you continue violating the rules of this public hearing. So that's what I was just saying, that the video camera would be, the presenters would switch it on at the beginning to take the oath, and then to maybe commence with the presentation. And for sake of ease of data flow, they may then switch the cameras off and continue with the presentation. The last rule, which is the third one, is that please use the chat responsibly to contribute to a meaningful discussion throughout the public hearing. Just a second, just want to be able to deal with the situation that I'm facing now.
I dealt with Chairperson. You can continue.
Oh, thank you. Please. We have 9 presenters for today's public hearing. And Eskom, as said earlier on, will be granted the 30 minutes as the applicant, and other presenters shall be granted 20 minutes to present. If they do less than that, we'll highly appreciate it, noting the number of presenters that we have today. Once all the presenters have done made their presentations, we'll then get Eskom to respond to questions at the end. The presenters that we have today, one is Mr. Kalib Kasim, representing Eskom. 2, Honorable Caleb Kachale,
Yes.
Member of Parliament representing the Democratic Alliance. And then let me just assist. Okay, and sorry, that I just got disturbed. 3 is Councillor Michael San, representing the City of Johannesburg, will do a joint presentation with City Power, with Mr. Frank Hinder, the 4th one, representing City Power. Then Mr. Fanele Mondi, representing Energy Intensive User Group, EIUG, and Councillor Tyrone Gray, representing Mohale City, Mayor Giodin Hill Lewis, representing the City of Cape Town, 8 being Mr. Clyde Mallison as a private citizen, and last but not least, 9th being Mr. Yanni Stradom, representing Agri Western Cape. Apologies if any of these names or surnames have been pronounced incorrectly. Before we proceed, I would like to note that NESA is actually an organization in mourning with the passing on of our dear colleague, Mr. Dennis Tommy CML, on the 14th of September 2022. Mr. CML was employed at NERSA as the head of Department for Electricity Licensing, Compliance and Dispute Resolution. He has served this organization for 14 years. Our heartfelt condolences to Mr. Semela's family, friends, and colleagues on the loss of their loved one. May they and all of us find hope in the midst of sorrow and comfort in the midst of pain. I therefore humbly call upon all of us to please observe a moment of silence, noting Psalm 90 verse 12, which calls upon us to let God, open quote, teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom, close quote. Let's observe the moment of silence. Amen. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Let's then proceed to go to the first presenter for the day, Mr. Kalib Kasim. Mr. Kasim, do you have any objections in taking the oath?
No, Chair, I don't.
Thank you. Please raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do, Chairperson.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name, the company, and the designation therein.
My name is Caleb Kassem. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Eskom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasim. As already stated, you've got your 30 minutes starting now. And please, at the end, you then be asked questions, get a round of questions from the panel members. So we would appreciate if you can just stick to that, to the time given. I take it that is 09:16 now, but we'll start with the clock will start to tick from 09:17. Please proceed, sir.
Yeah. Chairperson, can we just get up my other colleague, Cabello, to swear in now because he will do half the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Thank you. Do you have any objections in taking the oath?
No, sir, I don't.
Thank you. Please raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. For the record, please state your name, the company you represent, and your designation therein.
Cabello Masike, I'm a senior consultant in Eskom Treasury.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Let's then get going. Yeah, I will time you from 09:18. Proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just putting it in presentation mode. Is that fine, Chair? Can I proceed?
Proceed, please.
Yes. Thanks, Chair. Our application for MYPD 5 for the second and the third year, we have made our submission in June 2021. Eskom did follow a process where we consulted with Salga and National Treasury. That application was made to the regulator, and then following a few processes in terms of court reviews, the court has ordered that NERSA then adjudicate on the second and the third year that is being consulted upon. Eskom maintains that we have not changed our application, and that remains. We have, in this presentation, provided updated information, like we've done in previous hearings, and including the first year of this MYPD 5 for NERSA to consider in its final determination. Chairperson, and the last element is following our application that there was a court decision around the 59 billion, and that gets implemented from the next financial year, and we highlight and how we propose to deal with that. And similarly, under RCA, the determination for FY 2022, like in previous revenue applications, NERSA requests Eskom to put proposals forward on how do we see that phasing for NERSA to consider. And that's what we have done. In terms of the key changes, or in terms of information that we believe it's relevant for NERSA to consider, substantially it revolves around the EAF performance of Eskom's generation fleet. We know that's in the public domain. We're currently experiencing the various load shedding and regressively so, and we do apologize for that. But also the other factor is in terms of the IPP windows and the timing of those. There's been some delays that then get incorporated in this updated information that we do provide for NERSA to consider. And then we've given an update in some of the dates around the commissioning and shutting down of the various units of the power station. This is all important because ultimately what this does then leave you with what are the sources of supply that are available to meet the demand of the country, and importantly, as a last resort, within the methodology that NERSA has approved, within the grid code and dispatch rules, you run the OCGTs as a last resort to minimize the impact of interruptions or avoid it at all. That's what this information demonstrates for NERSA to take into account. Chairperson, just to remind the audience and the public, in January 2022, the original June 21 application had an assumption on OCGTs of 1% load factor. Through their public hearings, we submitted an updated information of a 6% load factor. NERSA did take that into consideration when they made the 9.6 decision, thereby allowing a 3.5% load factor in the 9.6. So when we look at the key information that has changed and is more relevant, especially projecting into the next financial year and the year after, on which the decision will be made, we see that there is a slight increase in sales volumes of 1 terawatt, and in the next year, a drop of 0.5 terawatt. But the big difference is coming in terms of the primary energy increases in terms of rand cost, 6.4 billion in 2024 and 10.7 billion in 2025. Chairperson and members of the panel, Eskom has not changed anything on its operating costs. We've not changed anything in terms of depreciation. We still maintain that our regulatory asset base as we were originally submitted. We have also in this taken into account the decision that NERSA made in year one by not allowing any arrear debts to be recovered from the rest of the customer base. We've then removed this in the revenue requirement element. And then we've also, following the Minister of Finance's speech, that carbon taxes, Eskom will not be liable for it. So we've also adjusted for that. In terms of what does it mean from a allowable revenue perspective, as I've indicated earlier, that the total allowable revenue before RCAs and the court order is maintained per our application of June, and correctly so, after demonstrating taking out the rear debts, the carbon tax, and showing the impacts of the primary energy and the other elements, the balance is then affected in the regulatory asset base. I think what is important to highlight here, it still reflects a return on assets of 1.7% in 2024 and 1.58% in 2025. This is well below the weighted average cost of capital that then allows for cost reflectivity in terms of NERSA's decision of the first year at about 10% cost of capital. Chairperson, I think, and members, it's important that we've demonstrated how this revenue is allocated between the three licensees. And in our proposal we've made is that there is no allocation of the court order or the RCAs to generation. And the objective of that is to demonstrate, and importantly, that we can put the transmission and the distribution businesses, one, at a cost reflective level in this determination and decision that NERSA will undertake. More importantly, that sustainability will go a long way in seeking the lender consent that we need for the unbundling, and it will mean that the network businesses going forward should not be a burden on the fiscus. It does mean from an industry perspective, we will still have to deal with the generation license, and that will take time to resolve. But I think as an industry, if we can demonstrate the network business as sustainable, that gives a positive message to many stakeholders. If I just unpack the big drivers to this price expression in terms of the allowable revenue compared to the current price that consumers are paying, the big drivers are the depreciation, which is linked to our asset base. So you need to adjust for that, contributes 10.7%. With the IPPs and the timing, as well as incorporating emergency requirements for the energy crisis portfolio that we're dealing with, that contributes 9%, and then Eskom's own primary energy 7.8%. Within Eskom's primary energy, the big contributing factor is the OCGTs of 4.9%. You can see that our coal increase from what was allowed by NERSA only increases by 1.65, and then the fuel oil that comes through on the back of the changing prices in terms of those commodities, as well as then the increase in load factor on OCGTs of 12%, and then more additional volumes on startup fuel. Chairperson, I'm not going to go through this in detail. I have explained it yesterday. Just to highlight that in terms of the RAB, you will see that on the transmission side, the first year we awarded 88% of our asset base and distribution 94%, whereas the gap and what we have reviewed is on the generation side, where we have received 31% in terms of the regulatory asset base. What this submission, which is now, if you the allowable revenue and taking into account the RCA as well as the court order, you will see that transmission approaches its cost reflective returns, and distribution increases significantly as well. From a financial sustainability, Chairperson and members, the cost reflectivity is one of the key pillars. However, 3 other pillars need to also contribute to Eskom's financial viability. Eskom needs to address its cost base in an efficient manner and deliver that. Number 2, whatever we charge and we bill out to consumers, we must be able to collect that. Currently, arrear debts from municipalities is sitting at 49 billion. And yes, we are dealing and working with National Treasury and the shareholder to address the unsustainable 400 billion debt stock. That needs to be taken into account. But if you just deal with that in the absence of the other elements, you would not find Eskom in a financially viable situation, and we will continuously then be a burden on the fiscus. It's important as well that we take an opportunity as the regulator to deal with the tariff structures. The last time any adjustments were made to it was in 2012. In light with the changing industry, there's an opportunity to also address those structures. Chair, that is my part of the presentation. I'll hand over to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Masike, and please proceed with your part of the presentation.
Thanks, colleague. Thanks, Chair. I think, Chair, what I want to take the committee through here is the results of the study that we conducted in conjunction with the private firm, Genetic Analytics, and the University of Pretoria on the macroeconomic impact of the MYPD 5 application that we had. So in its entirety, including the year that is unfolding now. So 3 main elements that we essentially the study looked into. I'll not spend too much time on the first element, as I think members are aware of the particular history of that trajectory. And then we looked at the overview electricity demands, the determinants of electricity demands, and the evolution of the composition of our economy with respect to that. And then, of course, the main focus of the study was the modeling the so-called CGE model, where we try to link everything else with everything in the economy just to assess what the world would look like in a particular scenario that would be developed there. In terms of the determinants of electricity demand, Chair, I think it is important, we've highlighted this point before about the structure of the economy, about, of course, the levels of economic output. There is a significant correlation between economic activity and electricity consumption. Increasingly of late, we have elements about the technology that is available as well, where in terms of potential competitors to the grid or potential substitutes. And of course, the price level does have an impact on the overall level of demand there. With respect as well, Chair, I think it's important that we emphasize that there is in our country, we've got a significant price difference between the average Eskom tariff and the municipal tariff. I think we must take that into account. But overall, when we looked at the economy, that from who is actually buying our electricity, about 80% of our electricity is consumed in the productive sector of the economy, and just above 20% in the household space. And when you look at that productive sector of the economy, you realize that about 74% is in the mining and industry, as we articulated. So it is important to find out the intensity, the energy intensity of those particular sectors and how they have performed over time with respect to the overall impact to electricity sales in the country. So zooming in on those particular sectors that I mentioned as them being key consumers of the electricity in the country, the mining sector and the industry, and to some degree the commercial sector, you see the intensity level, the electricity intensity levels that have significantly improved, one can put it that way, from 2009 over a 10-year period to 2019, which was the period here under review. So it says to us that our key customers are becoming more efficient, and or they are using other alternatives to supplement the supply that we actually have. So I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind about the overall dynamics and changes that are taking place in the economic environment, and overall the impact that these changes actually have on the South African economy as a whole. Members would recall and be aware of the challenges that at least these key sectors, the mining and industry, have had during the period under review. And it therefore should not come as a surprise when the overall trajectory on electricity sales in the sector has been somewhat benign or somewhat on a negative side over time. So in the macroeconomic modeling, what essentially are we looking at? So we're saying from a cost recovery perspective, there are two avenues in the main. We do it directly from the consumer through the tariff, and then there's an indirect way of recovering the cost either through the government as in direct injections, or implicit or explicit subsidies, as it were. And somewhere in between there, Jay, you can add borrowings, but as you mentioned, borrowings is a short-term measure. At some point, you borrow to the tilt, and your lenders tell you that this much and no further. So essentially, long-term, you have two main pillars of where you can your costs can be recovered from. That is the sum total of it all. Now, as I said, what scenarios did we put in? Well, we looked at the MYPD 5 scenario. Members would recall what that application looked like at 20.5 as year one, and 15.7 and 10% for the third year. And then we also looked at what we deemed a high price scenario. So year one, so we would have a shock on the system of 30%, and the subsequent years would have 11% for the two remaining years. The other scenario that I want to draw your attention to really is the inflation-linked scenario. Quite often we hear debates in public discourse about shouldn't we link the price to inflation, or should we just only not give an inflation-linked price adjustment? So we thought we modeled that in together with a low price scenario of 10% across the 3 years, and let's run that in the model and see what the outcome would be. At this point, Chair, I think I must make an important point about once you deviate from what Eskom has put through as a prudent and efficient cost in terms of their application, we must accept that if we give a tariff, we have a traffic trajectory that is lower, that is a revenue shortfall. The costs that Eskom had intended to incur, those costs remain. So they must be recovered somewhere. So in the model, we made a point to have that cost recovery somewhere else. To say if that cost recovery does not take place at the level of the tariff, it must take place somewhere else. And as I mentioned, long term, somewhere else is from government, either through higher taxes or equity injections. As I mentioned, equity injections, which are higher borrowings themselves from their perspective, and reprioritization of their expenditure profile, as it were. It is an important point, Chair, that I want to emphasize, because many of my colleagues in the analysts world quite often analyze a higher tariff compared to a lower tariff. It should be common cause amongst us that if you have a higher tariff and a lower tariff will always compare more favorably than a higher tariff. But in our view, that is a partial analysis at best. Because, as I said, the costs remain, unless you argue that there is a way that these costs will somehow dissipate. If you admit that those costs remain, then it must be accounted for somewhere. They must be recouped somewhere. So the model must go further beyond just the tariff disparity and infuse the impact of the recovery of the revenue shortfall from the fiscus. So what sort of scenarios or what sort of results did we come up with? Just as an indication, as you would expect, the green elements indicate that a favorable outcome. The darker the green part, the darker the green element, the more favorable, and the red element indicates a less favorable outcome, and the darker, the more severe impact that we're referring to. So let's focus on the high price scenario and MYPD 5 scenario for starters, because they flock in the same direction, as it were. We realize that from an economic growth perspective, for the period under review, over the base, the high price scenario has got a greater detracting impact on GDP growth. In a sense that we're saying over the base, the GDP growth of that particular tariff scenario, holding everything else constant in our economy, that we would have a 0.9% improvement from what would have otherwise been the base. You compare that with MYPD 5, then you see a 0.64%. What that essentially says that that's the scale, which is where we've got as low as possible increases. That is, Chair, we realize that it is actually negative for GDP growth. And one of the negatives that come up with that is that from a public sector borrow, we see an increment in public sector borrowing that relates to, amongst others, the reprioritization of expenditure to Eskom, and or, as I said, the increase in either taxes or. Important point I want to make here, Chair, is that which I see as well as and be sustained as we move along. For as long as there is that disparity between cost reflectiveness and tariff, that 80 billion rand is a running injection. So it's not that you do a once-off 80 billion and the problem is solved. No. When the period is done and we get, if you want to maintain the gap, you need another 80 billion to infuse, which to some extent, so essentially what have these results showed us. Little dispute. That is born out of not an efficient way either. That is not even an efficient way of correcting the imbalance that we actually have. So it is my submission to you, Chair, that if you hold that the costs that Eskom incurs are prudent and efficient, then you must allocate a tariff that reflects those costs. At least you must embark on a process of expediting the process towards cost reflectiveness. That has to be done in our country. If we don't do that, Chair, we will continue to have the situation that we are having now. I dare say it to you, Chair, that in my opinion, quite frankly, the problems that we are encountering now are not unique to us. Regrettably, it's quite ubiquitous in our continent that you find punctuated at best security of electricity supply. I mean, you go to Angola, you've got the same problem. You go to Luanda, you go to Brazzaville, you get Kinshasa, you get the same problem. Johannesburg is now facing the same problem. We've got less than secure electricity of supply. So, but what is the common factor amongst all these utilities? Don't take my word for it. Listen to what the World Bank is saying. The World Bank is saying the problem in African utilities in the most is the difference between the tariff level and the costs that are incurred to produce and generate that electricity. If we don't have the tariff that covers the cost in their entirety, it's only a matter of time that we have situations that are similar to the ones that we are encountering now. I put it to you, Chair, that if we don't correct the situation, then in my analytical opinion, and I am not impugning in any way what my learned colleagues in the engineering field have told you about the plans that needs to be done. But if we don't correct this situation, the tariff situation, we will have this problem for quite some time to come. Because when they rock up at Eskom Treasury and with their grand plans of what needs to be done for maintenance work and everything else, we will tell them that the tariff is not sufficient and we don't have enough money in the kitty for them to do, to the extent at least, the maintenance and refurbish work that they need to do in order to restore the integrity of our supply. So I implore you, Chair, pleading that if indeed you find that there is merit in the cost, at least the cost levels that have been suggested by Eskom, then the tariff should, with some speed, be adjusted to recover that particular cost. It is the most efficient thing for us to do. It is a painful thing for us to do as a country, but it is the most efficient thing for us to do. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. That's our presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Passin and Mr. Masike. We'll then proceed to give the panel an opportunity to ask questions. And thanks for also adhering to the time allocated to you. Members of the panel, any questions from your side? I'll start off with Mr. Pukula, followed by Madam Sibia. Over to you, Mr. Pukula.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is very quick. I think the sound quality when the presentation of Mr. Kalib started was not clear from my side. I just want to get his confirmation that the application that they have submitted to NESA has been approved by National Treasury and SALGA as it is required. I mean, even the revised one. I heard him say something to that effect. I just want that confirmation. It's really a yes or no.
Thank you, Mr. Pukula. I may then proceed to Madam Sibiya.
Thank you, Kabazan. Thank you to the presenters, Mr. Caleb Kasim and Mr. Kabelo Masike. Chair, let me start with my questions. The first one is under key challenges and assumptions. Just from a clarity perspective, Medupi Unit 4 and Kusile Unit 5 and 6, you actually mentioned the dates there. Were those extensions? Can we, as the committee around here, assume that those now will be dates that will be achieved? Because I'm assuming those were actually the dates where they had to change due to some reasons. If they can give us that clarity, if those were the original dates, and if not, after all the work that you've done, have those days been firmed up? And then second question, Chair, it's with regards to primary energy. I hear Mr. Kasim when he talks about the issue of coal cost going down. But I think there is some, for me, what is missing when you talk about that, because that has a serious implication on the OCTGTs. Because then if you look at coal cost going down, maybe it's the reason that you are still BT, which therefore results in frequent breakdowns in coal stations, and therefore resulting in running OCTGTs more than planned. So I think, Mr. Chair, it's an issue of breaking down the reduction in cost, because it therefore means you are burning less. It's not just that they are going down, because that line of coal costs, it includes opening stock plus purchases plus closing stock. So it's a mix of those three. So to just say it is going down and therefore we can just move away from it, for me, it has a serious implication on OCGTs. I just wanted to find out from Mr. Kasim to say, have they looked at the option of securing high quality coal and therefore burning coal more, and therefore not having serious implication on the current plant, and therefore running OCTGTs less, which is less cost on that OCTGT line? And then the last question to Mr. Masike Kabelo, on your key messages. You mentioned the issue of that the tariff must be cost reflective, and then you have a statement there that says where we are, it's a consequence of historical underpricing and underinvestment. I just have a question on you when you say underinvestment. Are you late investment with underinvestment, because starting projects late and having cost reflective? I think we really need to look into that, because it will not be fair to expect the consumer to pay for such issues whenever we are talking about this issue of tariffs being cost reflectives. The costs need to be efficient. The question that should be asked to yourselves, and you should always,
how those scenarios will contribute towards that, or are they indicated in one of the slides that if just wanted to check whether that scenario that
in line also with the question asked by Mr. Pukula,